Welcome to Power Talk. I'm Chris Bishop, and welcome to our first of our special debates for 2014. We're coming to you from Wits Business School in Johannesburg, and we'll be looking at the question of the state in energy in Africa. A very large debate, a very important debate for the many emerging economies on the continent. There was a lot of talk about it recently at the recent IMF meeting, where Barack Obama said he'd commit $7 billion. We'll be talking about all of this with our esteemed panel. I introduce Ebrima Fal, Regional Director, AFDB, Brian Damas, CEO, Eskom, Chris Yelland, MD, EE Publishing, Cornelius van der Waal, Business Unit Leader, Energy and Power Africa, Frost Sullivan in Cape Town, and Ken Robinson, MD of Energy, Accenture SA. Just to start off with, if I could start off with you, Ebrima, just a short statement of what do you think is the greatest challenge facing the future of energy in Africa?
Thank you very much, Chris. Thanks for inviting us to this important discussion. I think for us, it's the lack of sufficient generation capacity. As a continent, where you can actually superimpose a lot of the other continents of Europe, Asia, etc., in Africa. But when you look at our total generation globally, in terms of global context, it's less than 5%. The implications, of course, are the limited access that poses for the population, with 60% of the population don't have access to electricity. And I'm sure we'll discuss some of the other issues to go with that.
Brian Damas of Eskom.
Thank you, Chris. I mean, from our perspective, truly Africa is still the dark continent. And that's a challenge that we have. So it's an issue of making sure that we have energy security, making sure that we have energy access, that is affordable, thirdly, and fourthly, that it's sustainable. And I would suggest that is the order in which we deal with this.
Chris Yelland of EE Publishers.
Well, I want to say that we don't have an energy problem at all in Africa.
Okay.
We have a serious management problem in Africa, including in South Africa. And we need to get our head around this. This is a business school, and it makes a lot of sense to be talking about what is wrong with the structure of energy in Africa? What is wrong with management in Africa? We've got hydro, we've got oil, we've got coal, we've got nuclear, we've got renewables, we've got every form of energy. We are rich in energy, both primary energy and human energy, but we just don't seem to be able to harness it. And I would say we should focus on the management aspect wherein we have the biggest problem.
Cornelius van der Waal.
Well, Chris, I think raising the $1 trillion that's required to give us the 250 gigawatts of baseload power required till 2030 is certainly one of the biggest challenges. And then selecting the right technologies for Africa is going to be crucial. I think that not enough thought is going into what is best for Africa at this stage.
Ken Robinson.
Yes, I would give the challenge as how does Africa help itself? Or perhaps more locally, how does South Africa exploit the opportunities that the rest of Africa are offering?
So to start with you, Brian, of all the panelists here, you wield the most power over the generation of electricity on the continent. I can just put a question to you. I ran into a former Eskom executive the other day, who will remain nameless, who said to me that he believed for the last 20 years Eskom should have been adding at least 2,000 megawatts a year over the last. He said that hasn't been done, and he thinks it's too late to catch up. What do you say?
Yeah, no, that's correct, and there are many former Eskom executives. But that is correct. And that is the challenge of making this vast investment in generation capacity. Whatever technology you choose, energy you don't dream up overnight. These are long-term investments. You have to need lots of funds, and you need a very clear policy framework. South Africa has learned a very hard lesson, and it's still in that process. And we must make sure we don't get there again. So at least we have an electricity plan. Now we have to make sure it gets implemented. But for the rest of the continent, those are some of the things that's lacking. The fact that you need a long-term plan, that you need a policy environment to do that, you need a management capacity to exploit that, and you need government, you need certainty in terms of policy and government implementing its policy decisions. That's crucial.
Chris Yelland, how concerned are you about the future of power on this continent, bearing in mind what's just been said?
Well, I'm not that concerned in the sense that we will bumble on. We will carry on like we have been bumbling on, not taking the high road, but sometimes taking the middle road and the low road. We will eventually get there. There are some notable successes that we are seeing, for example, the Renewable Energy IPP program, but there's some very notable failures. And we're seeing the turbulence in the South African electricity supply industry at the top, at the management level. When I talk about management, I'm not just talking about the management of Eskom. I'm talking at from the cabinet through to the Department of Minerals and Energy, Department of Energy, Department of Public Enterprises, Eskom, the regulator, municipalities. There just doesn't seem to be a consistent, coordinated policy framework and vision. And that's where the problem is at the moment. I'm not over concerned in the sense that we will just bumble on.
So Cornelius, just give us a wider picture now. What is actually at stake, you think, for investment, getting this state of the energy question right in Africa?
Yeah, I think we make a ginormous mistake to speak of Africa as a homogeneous sort of a region. I think we really have to distinguish between rapidly growing economically Africa, average growth, and disaster, if we want to call it that. In rapidly growing and expanding Africa, I have a lot of hope, and there is a lot of signs showing us that there will be significant investment. In sort of average growth, that's where the big problem is at the moment. That's where we need to enable capacity to release the resources, and a lot of that, of course, is inland. To bring these resources through, not only through electricity, but through road and rail infrastructure, through port infrastructure, housing, social infrastructure. All of these things need to be managed in a more coordinated fashion.
Ken Robinson, how much do you see of this happening? I mean, everyone knows what needs to be done. Where do you think the solution is going to come from?
I think there's a strong opportunity for the solution to come from South Africa. I think we've got skills. We may not have funds. We've certainly got the construction companies that can do civil engineering. We could industrialize the building of all transformers in this country for the rest of Africa. We could supplant the Chinese and the other global players who are looking for Africa as a market and make it our market.
Talking about infrastructure, I mean the AFDB, that is your stock in trade. What are you trying to do to solve this question?
I'm much more optimistic, and I guess I have to look at it from a continental perspective. I mean, that's our canvas, if you wish. I'm hopeful. I mean, I see the PIDA projects. About 60% of that is transport and energy. There's a forecast that the target is to try to do about 30,000 megawatts by 2040. Most of it hydro. We know the potential that Ethiopia, that Inga, Angola, and other countries have in this space. The issue, has been rightly pointed out, is finance, is institutions, is regulatory, and these are things that we have to address face on. And I think we've started that process.
Brian Damas, I mean, looking ahead for the solutions, what is Eskom trying to tackle the hardest to improve the situation?
You know, I think our perspective of Africa is one that is very bullish. And I must say to everybody that that is true for most global power companies. The opportunity lies in Africa. You have some of the fastest growing economies on this continent. You have an abundance of primary energy resources. Africa can sustain itself 10 times over with everything it has. It's got an abundance of renewables, etc., etc. So we certainly see ourselves playing a role within the continent. We're certainly the largest power company on the continent, and Africa's growth is also going to be regionalized. I see a greater sense of cooperation amongst different regions in Africa. Southern Africa, we have the Southern African Power Pool. We've got great resources, gas, coal, hydro, and an abundance of renewables. And as Eskom, we certainly see ourselves playing a role. Same with East Africa. I think West Africa has got a bit of an energy deficit from a primary energy perspective, and North Africa, you know, Egypt certainly dominates, and a lot of work needs to be happening there. But one of the key issues in Africa, over and above skills and policy, is the fact that we need to start getting energy security through greater interconnection. You know, so everybody wants to build a power plant. It's not that easy. Somebody has to. But if everybody is connected, like in Europe, we can get greater energy security. And the work that, and I'm fortunate to do some work through the UN, through the Energy for All work. We do it with AFDB, Power Africa from the US. And that's really focused on getting energy access going. And a key part of that for us as Eskom is to play a role in enabling the projects, a few generation projects in the region, and then to play a role in integrating the electricity networks and be able to make sure that we can get power to flow freely, certainly in Southern Africa.
Chris Yelland, I mean, like most journalists, we're always very quick to criticize. And well, what would be your solutions? I mean, if you had the power tomorrow over the resources, what would you be doing?
As I say, we have the primary energy in Africa. It's abundant. We've also got this abundant human energy, but it needs to be unharnessed and unleashed. We talked about finance as a constraining factor, but truly, finance is not a constraining factor, in my opinion. We need to reach out to all these sources of finance that are available. We've just seen in the Renewable Energy IPP program, where the private sector has put in billions of rands into renewable energy. This is not coming from our taxpayers' pocket, from the fiscus. It's coming from local and international sources. We need to harness all these things, and we need to look at what are we doing wrong. What is doing wrong in South Africa and in Africa is that we have this institutionalized, monolithic monopoly that has got a grip on the energy sector and is not allowing new players to come in, not necessarily directly, but the regulatory framework, the policy framework, and even within Eskom, the monopoly hangs on to its status quo. We've got to restructure this environment. That is exactly what Nigeria is doing. They're restructuring their energy sector because of the total failure of the monopoly state-owned enterprises that have got a grip on that industry.
But in the intro, we mentioned about the billions that possibly may come from the Obama administration. But surely, Cornelius, Africa should be investing in itself and shouldn't be waiting for outside money to come in. What do you say?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's absolutely crucial. It is so true that some of the largest companies in Africa are sitting on stockpiles of cash, not knowing where to invest at present. If we can create the certainty in terms of policy, in terms of environment for companies to see that they can make a 15-year investment with a return on their investment in a stable environment, we can forget about the development finance institutions, because private sector has got the finances to help us to raise whatever is required. But they need the certainty around who will manage the risk and will they be able to turn a profit.
Ken, do you see companies able to take the risk and invest their money in the future of the continent, for the future of the economies?
Yes, the issue, of course, is that many of the areas are typical monopoly areas. Brian talked about transmission, but distribution is a crisis area for the whole of Africa, including South Africa. And if we can get distribution right, then these headlines of power stations will be moved to actually making sure the wires work, the meters are read, and the billing systems operate, and that prepaid, which is really the answer for Africa, is introduced with payment systems, perhaps supported by mobile phones, that can operate and ensure the sustainability that we're looking for.
Very forward-looking. In the AFDB, I mean, what's your approach?
Yeah, if I can just react maybe to Cornelius's point that perhaps, with certainty you can have the private sector really financing all of the... That will never happen, I don't think, because the way that energy supply is structured, and if you look at the profile of the project cycle, in the first two phases, you will never have the private sector. You must de-risk those projects from the many risks that it has, both in terms of political risk, in terms of operational risk. And it is later on at the end of the day. And that's exactly what happened with the renewables program in South Africa. I think to a large extent, the government was able to de-risk those projects and then pass it on to the private sector. So I think it's a collaborative effort, I think, that a PPP partnership that will make this happen.
No, I just want to build on that. I think it's very important. It is a collaboration. The renewable program in South Africa is the best risk-free investment for any investor. You get a 25-year guarantee from Eskom for a tariff that a South African consumer is going to pay. It's the best, Now, it's policy, it's certain, that's great. And having Eskom is actually great because it's a great credit for anybody to take to a bank and raise financing. And most of the financing come out of South African capital markets in any case. most of that actually South African DFI financing at cheaper rates and how much equity has been put in. So I think it's a collaboration. I think there's other few truths that is true for us in Africa as well as the rest of the world. Firstly, politicians will never let the lights go out, whether you're in South Africa or anywhere else in the world. Secondly, they will never let the price go to where the market set the price. Not as far as electricity is concerned. It happened in California and everybody stepped in. And you deregulate in Australia and they step in. And at the end of the day, you find generation and distribution companies having back-to-back contracts that actually deals, and a very small portion of electricity ever gets traded on any free and market. South Africa certainly needs a market that needs to be opened up. It does not answer the question as to whether or not you're going to get cheaper electricity.
Well, Cornelius, I mean, we were talking before the show, one of the great energy stories of Africa right now is what's going on in Nigeria. Complete privatization of the generation system. Surely, couldn't this be a blueprint for the rest of the continent on how to bring more private money into generation?
Yeah, I don't think that we should use it as a blueprint. I do think that we need to look at that and say congratulations to Nigeria for having the insight to look at their own system and say what we have achieved here is not beneficial to the country. But I don't necessarily think that all countries need to privatize all their assets because I don't think that that is necessarily beneficial. But the mindset of having the collaboration, the PPPs that you were speaking about, in so many cases we don't even have that mindset yet. If we can't get that mindset right, then we won't be able to get that. So I think at a top level, we really need to start thinking about letting some of these things go, losing grip on the assets that we do have, and start thinking about the long-term potential that can be unleashed through partnership and mutual risk sharing.
Ken, I mean, how likely do you think there's going to be a mind change in the years to come about private money coming into power?
I think even though we've heard about the success of Nigeria, let's remember that the entire formal generation sector in Nigeria is 1/10 of Eskom.
Sure.
It's 4,000 megawatts.
But that's the problem.
That's the problem.
Yeah, that's what
but
they're doing.
my understanding from my colleagues in Lagos is that there is no private sector power station building going on. It's all being driven by the state sector.
But another interesting point, which I'd like to ask you about, Chris, I mean, Brian said the pricing should be right so that it's worth people's while to generate electricity. How likely is it, do you think, that people across the continent are going to ever stomach paying the real economic cost of electricity?
Look, Eskom and generators and transmitters and distributors need to sell electricity at the real price. The price that is market related and the real price. Anything else is a problem. The state has every right to subsidize the price. And therein, it can do so. If it wants to sell electricity to end users or industrial users at a lower than market price, that is a subsidy. It needs to be transparent in the price. That answers your question, Brian. I'm not saying that governments do not have the right to subsidize electricity to poor people. Of course they have the right to. So I think companies like Eskom and other companies in Africa do need to generate and sell at proper, real prices, not fictitious stuff. This business of controlling the price of coal, Brian, which Eskom is trying to do, try and regulate the price of coal below market price. This is a no-no. This sends out wrong messages into the economy that will seriously harm the economy. It will prevent the introduction of alternative energy sources like renewable energy. It will lock us into the dark ages of high emissions. It will not achieve what we need to achieve.
I mean, Brian,
only by market-related prices do we send the right signals to develop the right technologies for the right job.
Brian, I mean, what's your answer?
No, I fully agree. Let's take the example of coal in South Africa. I fully agree that we need to have a coal price that it's set and we should buy coal at market prices. That's fine. Then we should have electricity at market prices as well. Coal can't be 58% of my input cost. And it's regulated. And yet that input price is unregulated. Now, we've got no problem. Then deal with fuel costs as a pass-through, a full pass-through to the consumer. We do that every month with petrol. Now, I don't think it's a good thing for the country to do that. I think every country should use its natural resources to control its energy cost. It should. And then the technology choices are crucially important. So there are some key decisions to be made. There's an inherent subsidy in our country for many consumers, and those are important. And you do need you need the private sector in South Africa. We need new money to deal with, again, I'll go back to the challenge of the vast investment. And Africa needs that. We need policy certainty. We need institutions that don't change every time you have a minister changing in the continent. In many of the countries in Africa, my colleagues change out every time they have a new Minister of Energy. And he changes out or she changes out and the regulator changes and then they start all over. You cannot have that and attract investment.
Asking you, Cornelius, you study this, what can be done about this problem with uncertainty over regulation in the power industry? Because it's a continent-wide, we all agree. What do you think can be done about it?
Well, tongue in the cheek, maybe we should go to a communist system and then make sure that we have a government that remains stable for a very long time.
There you are.
That would certainly help. But no, seriously speaking, I think we need to, from a leadership perspective, start thinking about what is best for the country in the long term and stop thinking in 5-year terms of elected leaders. And that these policies should be amended from time to time, but not have 90-degree turns every time we have a new government in place. That would create some of the certainty that we required so that we can have these public-private partnerships in place. That would help a lot with price setting. That would help a lot with making sure that the regulator is able to do his or her job in the right way. That would just enable the stability that we need. And it's not just a South African issue. It's a in many respects a global issue.
Ken, and that's one question I can ask you. I mean, power, as we say, we know it's a 20-year cycle for planning for the future. In most countries, that's 3 or 4 governments changing, even if it's the same party. I'm just saying, I mean, can it ever be tackled?
Well, it has to be, doesn't it? It has to be. Otherwise, we all end up with diesel generators like Lagos.
Sure.
So it has to be. And but the key point, and I will go back to distribution and even transmission, those are not 20-year efforts. Those are much faster efforts. And yet much of the improvement in service to customers can come through distribution. Once, of course, you have to have the basic generation capacity. But with good distribution and even smart grids that can be developed, you can understand how to use the power that you do have.
Talking on wider projects, and I know the FDB's done a bit of work around it, but the Inga Dam in the Democratic Republic of Congo, people have always said there's enough power there for the whole continent plus export. There have been problems, it's not been moving as fast as people would like. But surely the question I often have as a journalist is, wouldn't it be worth pooling the entire continent's resources to get that, to try to fix the problem that we're all struggling with? What did the FDB say?
No, you're absolutely right. I mean, I think that 50 years ago, when we got, when we all got independence, we knew the potential of Inga. Roughly 40,000 megawatts can power the whole of sub-Saharan Africa, or most of it. The issue is whether we have the right institution that's able to. For example, when I was still teaching, one of the students said, well, why don't we have a tax on fuel that you apply across the continent at the rate of 3 cents per liter? That pays for Inga. Okay, that's the financing part. But what about the political part? What about the issue of governance within and outside? How do you transmit the power across territories? The issue of distribution. How do you build the interconnecting lines? So it is possible. I think that a step has been taken in the right direction by the African leadership through the PIDA programs. Inga is one of the flagship programs that they're pushing. We are providing support through preparatory studies and helping the government, bring government and ESCOM together, for example, in terms of offtake agreements. So it started, it's beginning.
Brian, I mean, you at ESCOM, you've been forced back to coal in some ways because of the dearth of electricity. But looking forward, how much more of a role is renewable energy going to make in the future?
No, I think, I think that the cell phone technology of our industry lies in end-use renewable technologies. So this building having its own generating source and feeding it back into the grid. That's the cell phone technology. It's happening in Germany. Most of the power companies are hardly running their plants. I think one of the key issues in renewables we're still struggling with is the issue of storage. I don't think batteries will necessarily find a solution that is scalable and cheap. And so that is always going to be an issue around solar, around wind. And so you will always need a base load capacity. The question is, what should that be? I think cleaner coal technologies would come along. The shale gas revolution has created a few problems globally for coal. And one of the key issues is that nobody is really investing in carbon capture and storage, the research and development, and finding solutions. Because of this abundance of shale gas in the US, no utility, no government is putting money into that. So that is a bit of a challenge. So I certainly see gas playing a big role in hydro. My vision for Southern Africa would be that you would have this massive hydro in the north, out of Inga, out of the Zambezi. You have this gas resources in the east and in Angola. You have renewables mixed in, a lot of solar, more solar than wind. And you would have coal as a base and nuclear as a base. And that together with a massive transmission network. And we have to address the distribution. I think South Africa has enough capacity every day. We meet it. It's tough, but we meet it. But sometimes your lights go out, and it's got nothing to do with us having the power because of the distribution networks. All of these networks that feeds this high building, most will be 30, 40 years old. And they need to be maintained. So Ken's point is very valid. But that would be my vision for Southern Africa. It's definitely doable. And to answer this issue of policy, the answer of that lies into strong institutional capacity. So let's start at the beginning where Chris spoke about capacity. Capacity of management, in regulators, in government, separating political areas from, separate the DG and the administrators from the politicians. Separate strong institutions from the political cycles. Then, throughout the continent, you'll be able to achieve all of that.
Experts on the state of energy in Africa. We've heard about a lot of the problems with capacity, distribution, policy, investment, and now we're going to the audience to take questions from many of the experts here of our esteemed panel. And I think I see my first question over there to the right. Do you state your name first, please, and your question?
It's Rosemary Falcon. I am a professor at Wits University. I hold the chair of Clean Coal Technology. My question relates to skills, which was coming up very much in their discussion earlier on. We do have huge amount of population in Africa and certainly in South Africa, but the skills is a major, major issue. A lot of our technical equipment that's coming in is coming in from abroad. In many cases, that equipment is not applicable to our coal and to our conditions in this country. Not only that, you have to look at what we are actually developing here. We don't have any coordinated look at this. I'm very much aware of Eskom's EPI program, which is beginning now to sort the problems and engineers that Eskom is looking at. But across the board, we do not have an engineering technical base to sort the problems that are being discussed here anywhere.
Okay. Mr. Damas, you're an engineer. Would you like to take that?
No, I'm not an engineer, Professor, but you're very right. And I think, if you would ask me what has been my biggest concern or fear at Eskom, has been the issue of skills. And over the last 3 years, I can say to you, we've brought back the thing like the EPI program. I've got 12,000 learners. We've got the highest number of engineers, and we're just training them through the basics. And I see how a power station gets maintained, operated, our operators work, and you're very right. It's a big issue. And you need a certain type of person as well. Not all have to be engineers. You need strong artisans. You need somebody to be an operator that's going to work shifts. Somebody that's going to climb up in a pole to deal with the distribution issue in the middle of the night. Now, you need people skilled to be able, because it's a dangerous job. And I think it's our single biggest challenge. And number of people, the qualifications, and the skills are not the same. Once you have a qualification, for me, at best at Eskom, you need to spend another 2 years before we'll even think about employing or appointing you full-time. Because we just have to build on that absolute skill, and that is the issue. I can see it in young people. The fact that they don't have the confidence, to make decisions. They don't know how, it's indicative in safety, in non-compliance procedures, and many other things. But you're very right. And we do need a coordinated effort to deal with this issue. And it's not just us. It is the regulators. It is all the municipalities in the country.
Okay, question from the lady in the centre there.
Antoinette Slavert from MoneyWeb. I would like to ask Mr. Robinson, you referred to prepaid electricity, which is the way to go. But I think many of the municipalities would differ from you because cutting electricity is actually the only leverage they have to collect arrears in water and in rates and electricity fees. But that really goes to a problem of municipalities being a totally different animal. And often energy is looked at in isolation, and then when one implements whatever makes sense from an energy point of view, you find unintended consequences in the municipal sphere. What do you think is the way to go? Should we keep municipalities as electricity distributors, or what would you suggest?
So I'm a firm believer that effective municipalities should stay in distribution, and that maybe 20 ineffective municipalities should be absorbed into a national distributor. And I would promote Eskom as being the candidate for that on an annual basis, because there are hundreds of municipalities that are not effective in this area. If you're talking about prepaid, I think prepaid is still the way to go. I would not depend just on electricity collection to drive the bad debts management in municipalities. You could still switch off a prepaid customer. So if you must have a switch off process for bad debt collection on other municipal services, then you can. But for me, prepaid is the way to go. I would, if you're a billed customer, the most effective way is to be paying by debit order. And I would question how many of you have confidence in your municipal billing system that you actually have signed a debit order.
Very quickly, Chris, you want to answer that too?
I'm just a little worried about what I'm hearing here. The municipalities are being painted as the problem in distribution. Well, there are good municipalities and there are bad municipalities.
That's what I
And
said.
there are also good Eskom distributors and there are bad Eskom distributors. We're also looking at technology, prepayment. I can give you examples where prepayment is doing extremely badly. And I can give you examples where it's doing very well, and the same with credit meters. By the way, in effect, a credit meter is really, you're actually prepaying. You have to, an industry has to pay a month's deposit up front, so that the council is always on the right side, and that they can cut you off and not lose any money. But do they? Well, we have to ask, for example, I talked about, our municipality is the problem. I can assure you that if the city power was operating Soweto, the way Eskom is operating Soweto, it would be bankrupt in 2 months. That is how bad the distribution is in Soweto. 80% of all electricity supplied to Soweto is not paid for. Is that a sign of a good Eskom distributor? No, it's not. So what I'm saying is be careful of painting municipalities as the bad guys and Eskom as the good guy that should take over all the municipalities, because if they ran it as they're running Soweto, we'd be in serious trouble.
Yeah, we run 5 million customers. We have a few 100,000 in Soweto, and we are not doing well in Soweto. But we have exceptional distributors in this country as Eskom. We track, I can tell you exactly how long it takes for us to answer a phone call from any one of our customers. I can show to you that over the last number of years, that our customer services indexes absolutely improve, and the downtime for Eskom customers has come down drastically. We serve less than half of residential customers in South Africa, most probably 30%, and most of them are rural. And we invest every year close to 10 billion rand in distribution. Now, we're not doing a great job, and we're definitely not doing a great job in Soweto, and that's got a legacy of its own. And we have to deal with that. But the municipal issue, Chris, I have seen it, and I'm worried. And I agree with Ken. There are cities that are doing excellent work, and our metro, some of them are doing excellent work. But I am extremely worried about local government.
Brian, may I just say, 5% of Eskom sales is to the residential customers that Eskom serves. 5%. So when you have very high non-technical losses in the residential sector, they're completely hidden in the global figures. You cannot see the wood for the trees. And in a municipality is ring-fenced as a distributor. You can see the wood for the trees. I challenge you. What are your non-technical losses in your residential domestic sector as a percentage of sales to your residential domestic sector? Then we can compare Eskom's performance with a municipal distributor's
Very
performance.
briefly, Brian, because we've got to move on. There's other questions that need to be asked. I mean, if you feel you need to answer.
No, I mean, it's a very small portion. You know, the issue of non-technical losses is a problem. It's theft. We have to deal with the meter issue, and there are technologies that can deal with good metering that allows you to switch the customer off. And in Soweto, we don't have control over our meters. You know, and the biggest problem that we have amongst our 5 million customers is a few 100,000 Soweto, and it makes up less than 2% of our electricity sales. So it is a small portion of our sales. It is a problem. It's still a big problem, and it's something that we need to solve.
Okay, so we move on. Question from the gentleman over here to the right.
Good
Your
afternoon.
name, please.
My name is Sam Mokati. I'm a student here at Wits Business School. I've got a question for you, Brian. I think Chris did allude that we've got a management problem in our continent and in our country. And I'm glad that you also concede to that. And I should believe that you are close to the Minister of Energy who is in cabinet. Do you show them the benefit? Like you said that the DG and the admin must be separated from politicians. Do you show them the benefit of doing that? Because I think that's the problem that which you are having currently. And I think as an expert in your industry, if you guide them to that direction, if you show them the benefit of actually doing that separation, perhaps that could actually help them to consider other possibilities that which you could have to cap the problem that which you have in our continent.
I think the answer is yes. I think we've had many discussions. I think the Presidential Infrastructure Commission has started to understand the importance of management skills and bringing the private sector even as part of that work. I think this work around professional civil service is starting to indicate that there's an understanding that you need to start seeing the separation between a continuity of officials, experts, professionals, whilst you have this necessary turn as far as the political leadership is concerned. We have. I think I'm encouraged that I'm starting to start, many people are starting to see and understand that. The question is obviously the resolve to now follow through. And it's not just for us, it's municipalities, municipal managers, the electrical engineer in the municipality, the artisan in the municipality, and so it goes throughout all of our society. We need to see that separation.
Rima, if I could just bring you in here. We've been talking about this country, but what are the kind of problems across Africa that are the same recurring problems?
The problems are the same. The problems of, it's not just the hard infrastructure, but there's also the soft side, the skills, the regulatory environment. I think we are trying to at least address this in a coherent manner in the sense that we're now trying to build our infrastructure, integrating skills into it, for example. And we also see, for example, in brain space where you have special schools that are targeted at the various components comprising this industry. The maritime sector is doing the same thing, where I think we still have a lot of work to do, and our governance department is also helping, is developing capacities and developing the governance structures, economic governance structures around these institutions. Yeah.
Okay, next question, gentleman on the right.
Good afternoon. My name is David Chamboga. I'm from the City of Johannesburg, Town Planning Division. My question is very simple. I just want to find out if there's ever been a research done to determine as to how much is the cost of building a new power station versus retrofitting new energy efficiency into the existing buildings in South Africa. My second leg of that question is the fact that sometimes the I think about 2 years ago, the Department of Energy did amended the National Building Regulations, where they included Part XA, which was talking about energy efficiency. The problem is one that people do want to comply with that because we force them to comply with that part of that legislation. But the problem is always monitoring and management, and also to what extent does energy departments assist those people in ensuring that those things are done, like your solar geysers and your pump, and ensuring fenestrations to the buildings and so on, because we try our level best to make sure that those things are done. But the problem is that some people sometimes tell us they don't have money, we cannot get that. We don't know where they have to go to get subsidies in order to encourage that. Because my question is basically to understand as to, like, if we invest in retrofitting those energy efficiency into buildings versus the cost of us building new power station. I mean, what will be the cost benefits and all of those things there? Thanks very much.
Would like to take that one. Cornelius.
I'll take that. Yes, there's quite extensive research that's been done in terms of the cost-benefit analysis, and it absolutely does make sense to invest in energy efficiency technologies. We've done some extensive research into industry, agriculture, residential, commercial industries to find out to what extent there is an appetite for this type of technology and the benefit thereof. And the shocking reality is that 95% of the individuals that we spoke to have absolutely no clue how they consume electricity. So if they don't know which appliances are consuming the electricity, it's very difficult to bring energy efficient technologies to the market. So that's the one side. On the second side, it is very interesting, for instance, in the agricultural industry, motors and pumps are a very important part of the typical agricultural processes. And many other farmers are so connected to their technology or their equipment that they have that they'll give it a name. They've got a pump. The pump's name is Betty. Betty's been on the farm 10 years. They don't want to get rid of Betty. Betty is there to stay. So even if you bring in something efficient, it's not that easy. So just straight doing a cost-benefit analysis is not necessarily solving the problem. And I think we have to do a lot of work in terms of educating South Africans, and especially government, with all the hundreds of buildings with lights and with HVAC and with lifts. You know, we can make a real big difference if we address that in an efficient manner.
Gentleman in the center there in the yellow t-shirt, you have a question for us.
Hi, my name is Mopelo. I'm at WBS, and I'm also an ESCOM employee. So I have a question. I'm not sure whether to pin it on Brian for my job's sake or not.
You can flip a coin.
In 2007, 20 engineers were sent to France with Arriva in the government program. And this was in light of the nuclear program coming to South Africa. And then there were deals struck. And 5 years on, well, in fact, 7 years on, there was Russia on the picture and other competitors. What is the story with nuclear?
No, I think let's be very clear. In 2007, we actually ran a commercial process to buy and build 2 nuclear units. And we decided not to proceed with that because there was just not the funding for that. Then we were overtaken by the IRP, which then called for quite a lot of nuclear by 2023, I think. And that process of deciding what to build and who's going to do it is now left in government's hands. So as ESCOM, we are not doing any procurement for new nuclear as to what we're going to buy, when we're going to do it, etc. The only work that we have been doing after 2007 was to continue the environmental impact assessments on the nuclear sites that we have. My personal view of nuclear, and it's certainly contained in IRP, that nuclear should be part of our options going forward as a country. You know, in about 10 years' time, we've got a big energy system. You know, we're about the 12th largest power company in the world. We've got a massive energy system. By 10 to 20 years from now, all of that will have to be replaced. Now, what do you replace it with? And we do need big baseload power, and nuclear should not be taken out of the mix and should play a role in South Africa going forward. And hence, we have to start building the skills to operate and maintain and build.
Ken, what do you think about viability and costs?
Yes, there's obviously a cost issue. But I would be highly critical of government in some respects. There was the minister put out a regulation saying we needed an immediate decision on nuclear in 2011, and here we are in 2014, and there's no decision. So we do need a decision, and I think we just need to take it. So cost comes into it, and the whole technology issue that we've talked about comes into it, and I think the new IRP is a good basis to do that.
Next question, gentleman in the white shirt down the front here.
Hi, my name is Mulanga, and I'm a Shell employee. So I just wanted to pose a question about fuel mix for Africa as a whole by 2030. So I was wondering, perhaps, what will you guys say probably will be the best sort of composition and proportionality of fuel mix for Africa by 2040, just for the sake of Africa growing in terms of infrastructure and the economic infrastructure as well as a whole?
Sounds like a very broad question. You can each, if you have a quick answer, starting with you, Arima.
Yeah, I think, if I hear you correctly, I'll yield to Brian, but what is the mix of projects we anticipate by 2030?
Yeah, I mean,
the energy mix.
solar, renewable.
Yeah, no, that I think I need to Brian. So.
You know, I would say to address the issues I raised, access, energy security, affordability, and sustainability, I would go for Africa with hydro, gas, coal, and renewables, particularly solar. And we can then talk about, how much of that would be.
Chris?
Guys, as I said earlier, this continent has got everything. We shouldn't get bogged down into what is the energy mix for the continent. Different countries have different priorities and different energy resources. It must be left to the market decisions. Sometimes some countries coal is a cheaper option. Every country has different priorities. If we get distracted and bogged down into these details, we're missing the real issue. The real issue is the management issues. We've got the energy. We've got every one of these energy sources in South Africa. In most African countries, they've got a whole lot of choices to make. So we're not short of choices. We're short of management.
Question here, gentleman in the front.
Duncan Clark from Global Pacific and Partners in Johannesburg. I'd like a panel in a one-liner to address the fundamental question that I think is there, posed earlier too, about the elephant in the room here, the excessive monopoly of state enterprise control on the energy systems right across the African continent, Cape Town to Cairo.
Starting with you. Ebrima, what do you think?
I think we have to realize that energy, like most other public goods, right, are not goods that the private sector will provide willingly, right?
They do all over the world. North America, Canada, United States included. Australia, they don't have state utilities generally.
Brian just gave you the example of Australia stepping back. There's a degree of regulation that must happen.
Well, the policy and regulation can be run by the ministry.
Excuse me, let me just finish.
But the operating companies don't have to be state-owned.
You asked your question, right?
Sure.
So let me finish. For the price to be viable, it has to be a mix. How efficient that mix is what's going to determine how the enterprise. Yes, there is inefficiencies in most of these state enterprises. There are inefficiencies in the private sector. It is how you manage those inefficiencies and reflect those in the prices that is going to determine whether you're profitable or not.
Brian, what do you say?
I think an absolute monopoly should die and should not continue. I think in South Africa you would need other players in this market. Alone Eskom can't meet the energy needs. You need new investment, you need new skills, you need other players. It does not solve the problem. As long as we all accept, it does not solve the problem whether or not the state is efficient, or for that matter the private sector is efficient. As long as it's efficient, to assume that you're suddenly going to have it a lot more efficient and a lot cheaper, it's not going to happen. But we do need other players, we do need to open up the market. And I think you should be very careful of which assets. Distribution has got a unique character to it, transmission has got a unique character to it, but certainly in generation space. For new capacity, I would not argue that Eskom should build another new capacity alone. It should do it in partnership. It should bring the private sector on board, do it jointly, and that's certainly the model that I see. And so it's a mix of both, as long as it's efficient.
Cornelius, from an analyst point of view, I mean, what do you think about what's been said?
Well, in Africa at present, we have at least 17 countries that's busy with some sort of a deregulation of the electricity industry. And I think that sensible deregulation is crucial for the continued existence of the industry. And the sensible is the really important thing. So to say we take the Nigeria blueprint and we sell off all distribution and all generation capacity is not the answer for each country. Each country needs to find their own solution. But can governments continue to have these monopolies? No, I don't think so. I don't think it's healthy. I don't think it's beneficial for the economy. I don't think it helps to stimulate learning, skills. We need all of these things, and we can't expect government to be supplying all of that.
Ken, what do you say?
I say we'll have effective state monopoly for the foreseeable future because the private sector will be so highly regulated it won't be private.
And Chris, briefly.
I think my position is clear about this matter. Getting to South Africa, I believe Eskom needs to be unbundled. Eskom generation should be unbundled into 5 or 6 generators competing. The transmission grid needs to be pulled out of Eskom into an independent system and market operator, including the grid itself. The distribution network should be rationalized. We have 185 municipal distributors. We should go to 6 regional electricity distributors. We also need to separate retail out of distribution, the trading out of the wires business and distribution. By the way, this is not my policy. This is the official government policy of South Africa, as encapsulated in the white paper on energy of 15 years ago. The only problem is we've never done it. We just haven't got the stomach to do what is right.
But it's really the trick. I mean, here we have a policy in 1998 that said everything Chris said. In addition to that, it says Eskom will not build any new power stations. And we created an energy crisis in South Africa. And the private sector never came. And why?
There are very good reasons for that, Brian.
Because you never fix the electricity price.
No,
and the
never structured the industry
No,
properly.
you never fix electricity price. And for 10 years, Ken worked on, for 10 years this country worked on trying to resolve the distribution thing that Chris spoke about.
They never privatized Eskom.
Right?
Or unbundled it.
It would not have solved the problem.
But I think this is almost subject for another program in itself. We just wrap up now. If I could start with you, Remy. We've heard a lot of maybe at times gloomy words today about the state of energy in Africa, but I just want to finish each one of you and say, what actually gives you hope about the situation?
We're very hopeful. We see leadership from the continent around the project for infrastructure development, both to increase capacity, to improve institutions, and to try to find and ensure that there's right pricing for tariffs for electricity. It gives me hope.
Brian.
You know, I'm very optimistic about the continent. You know, it's got some of the fastest growing economies, great potential. It's got a population that is young, that is getting into the middle class. It's got all of these energy sources. And, for me, this is certainly the place to be. We have the resources, just a question of getting our ducks in a row and then start implementing.
Chris, what gives you hope?
Yeah, I'm optimistic too, and I share Brian's sentiments. We've got the energy, we've got a young population that is underdeveloped, that its potential is still got to come out, and that is what makes me optimistic, that we got the primary energy, we got the human energy, we just got to sort out the management.
Cornelius.
I'm very optimistic about the future in the sense that we're sitting right on the brink of this massive explosion of access, of economic growth, of true poverty alleviation. And the decisions to get us there are not major decisions. It's tweaks. It's understanding that our leadership has the ability to enable this. And if they're willing to do that, we can get there.
Okay.
Well, I challenge everyone in the audience and viewers as well to adopt a great national project of developing, let's say, Inga. Let's understand the community development, the defence, the foreign affairs, the entire engineering that's going to be required to make the whole thing work.
Well, thank you very much to our esteemed panel. Ken Robinson, MD of Energy at Accenture SA. Cornelius van der Waal, Business Unit Leader at Frost & Sullivan. Chris Yelland, MD at EE Publishing. Brian Damas, CEO at Eskom. Ebrima Fal, Regional Director, AFDB. I'm afraid that's all we've got the time for at this Power Talk special debate from Wits Business School in Johannesburg. Until next time, from me, Chris Bishop, it's goodbye.